I'm a 31-year-old guy, and I've been with my fiancée Sarah for 3 years. We met in college, built a solid relationship, and now we're planning our wedding. But there's one major problem. Her parents, Richard and Linda. They're the kind of rich that makes them believe money equals power. And from the moment I entered their world, they've made it clear that I don't belong in it. I first met them at a dinner they hosted at their house. Their place looks like something out of a magazine, the kind where everything is staged to be impressive rather than lived in. The moment I stepped inside, I could tell this was more of an interrogation than a welcome dinner. Richard sat at the head of the table, asking pointed questions about my career, my financial future, and whether I had plans to move up in life. Linda played the role of polite hostess but threw in passive-aggressive comments about Sarah's high standards and how she always dreamed of her marrying someone with a certain level of success. By the time dinner ended, I knew exactly what they thought of me. I wasn't good enough. That never changed. Over the years, Richard and Linda made their disapproval clear in subtle ways. They never openly insulted me, but they didn't have to. Every conversation was laced with comments about my potential or comparisons to Sarah's high-earning lawyer friends. Every time we visited, they'd casually mention a family friend's son who just made partner or just closed on a multi-million-dollar property. Sarah ignored it, always shutting it down before it could escalate. She never let them dictate her choices, and for a long time that was enough. But when we got engaged, things got worse. The wedding became the battleground. Sarah and I wanted something simple, something that reflected us. Richard and Linda, however, wanted a spectacle. They pushed for a massive event, booked a venue before we even agreed, and started talking about guest lists filled with people we didn't even know. When we pushed back, they made it clear, if they were paying, they were in control. We refused their money. That didn't sit well with them. That's when they got desperate. Richard and Linda had spent years trying to steer Sarah toward better options. They introduced her to wealthy family friends, conveniently invited successful bachelors to events, and always emphasized how she deserved the best. Sarah saw right through it and never entertained any of it. But they weren't ready to give up. A week ago, Richard invited me to dinner, just me. He framed it as a peace offering, a chance for us to get on the same page. I knew better, but I went anyway. I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. The restaurant was upscale, the kind where the waiters pull out your chair and refold your napkin the second you move. Richard and Linda were already seated when I arrived, all smiles, acting friendlier than they ever had before. But that act didn't last long. Richard got straight to the point. He slid an envelope across the table and told me there was $250,000 inside. Linda sat beside him, nodding like this was a completely reasonable thing to do. They wanted me to leave Sarah, walk away, no questions asked, and disappear from her life. Their reasoning? Sarah would be better off with someone from their world, someone with money, status, and the kind of connections that set up a future. They believed she'd get over me, move on, and in time, thank them for saving her. I asked if they seriously thought Sarah wouldn't hate them for this. Richard barely blinked. He was confident she'd understand in the long run. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to control Sarah's future. They genuinely thought they could buy me off like some problem that needed to be handled. And the worst part, they really believed they'd won. At that moment, I had two options. I could throw the envelope back at them, 'cause a scene, and tell Sarah immediately, or I could play the long game. The idea hit me so suddenly that I almost laughed. What if I took the money? Not to leave, but just to spite them. I put on my best defeated expression and made it look like I was hesitating. After a long pause, I told them I didn't want to stand in the way of Sarah's future. I acted like I was heartbroken but understood their perspective. Linda reached across the table, patted my hand like I was a charity case, and Richard looked satisfied, like he had just closed a business deal. I took the envelope. Richard smirked, telling me I was making the right decision. Linda sighed with relief, acting as if the family was finally back on track. They gave me a timeline, leave quietly, no drama, and by the end of the month, Sarah would move on. I walked out of that restaurant with $250,000 in my pocket and a plan forming in my head. Sarah was going to love this. I barely made it through the door before I was pulling the envelope out of my jacket. Sarah stood in the kitchen, mid-sip of her coffee, and when she saw the cash inside, her eyebrows shot up. I laid it all out. Richard and Linda, the dinner, the bribe, the way they smirked, like they had just solved a problem. For a second, I expected shock, maybe anger, but instead, Sarah snorted. Then she burst out laughing. She reached into the envelope, flipping through the neatly stacked bills like she had just won the lottery. Then she looked up and asked the one question I hadn't even thought about. What if we kept it? I stood there as she tossed out ideas like paying for the wedding, putting it toward a house, or just taking a luxury vacation on her parents' dime. It didn't take long before we both knew exactly what needed to happen. We were going to let Richard and Linda believe they had won. The first step was selling the act. Over the next few days, Richard and Linda started treating me differently, friendlier, like I had finally done the right thing by letting Sarah go. They invited me to family dinners again, asked polite questions about my plans, and even sent me a wine bottle as a parting gift. Meanwhile, Sarah and I started planning the breakup. It needed to be public. dramatic, and most importantly believable. The opportunity came when Linda dropped by Sarah's apartment unannounced, something she did often under the excuse of checking in. I arrived 10 minutes later, making sure my voice carried as soon as I walked in. We argued loud enough for Linda to overhear everything from the hallway. Sarah's voice shook as she played the part of the heartbroken fiancé, accusing me of not being strong enough to fight for us. I played my role just as well, making it clear that I couldn't give her the life she deserved. Right on cue, Sarah stormed into her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Linda took the bait immediately. She waited just long enough for me to sigh dramatically before stepping inside. She placed a comforting hand on Sarah's back, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, as she assured her that this was for the best. I left without another word. The next morning, Sarah blocked me on social media. Linda wasted no time spreading the news to the rest of the family chat, framing it as an unfortunate but necessary breakup. By the end of the day, Richard had sent Sarah a long-winded email about how proud he was of her decision. I moved into a friend's place for a while to make things more convincing. A cousin, who was in on our plan, later told us that Richard and Linda hosted a private dinner to celebrate. Apparently, Richard made a toast about how family always prevails. With the first part of our plan in motion, we moved on to the next step, waiting for Richard and Linda to introduce Sarah to their idea of a better option. It didn't take long. A week after our breakup, Linda invited Sarah to a charity gala. The guest list conveniently included a young businessman named Andrew, early 30s, well-dressed, and exactly the kind of guy they had always pushed her toward. He came from an old money family, ran a successful firm, and most importantly, had their approval. Sarah played along, showing just enough interest to keep them invested. She let Linda gush about Andrew's wealth, let Richard hint that he was already one of us, and even entertained a few one-on-one conversations with him. Meanwhile, I kept a low profile. The money sat untouched in a high-yield savings account under my name. Every time I checked the balance, it felt like getting paid for putting up with years of their nonsense. Sarah made sure to drop hints that she was finally ready to move on, and it worked. Linda became more eager, encouraging Sarah to spend more time with Andrew. Richard, believing he had successfully fixed his daughter's future, started talking about restoring family reputation and even suggested that Sarah consider a destination wedding, without me, of course. The best part, Richard and Linda had no idea that Sarah and I still talked every day. They had no clue that we were counting down to the moment we would blow this whole thing up in their faces. When the time was right, we were going to expose everything. The bribe, their arrogance, and the fact that they had paid for their daughter's wedding without even realizing it. And when that moment came, we were going to make sure they never forgot it. Weeks passed, and Sarah played her part perfectly. She entertained conversations with Andrew, kept her parents updated with just enough fake enthusiasm, and let Linda believe she was finally coming around. Meanwhile, Richard had started acting like he had personally fixed her future, making comments about how it was about time she found someone suitable. The stage was set. Sarah invited Richard and Linda to dinner at an upscale restaurant, the kind they loved. She told them she had big news. They took the bait immediately, assuming she was finally going to announce an engagement to Andrew. They arrived dressed for the occasion. Richard, always one to make an impression, wore an expensive suit, and Linda had on a designer dress, beaming as if she had personally orchestrated the entire thing. They took their seats, their eyes already glimmering with victory. Sarah waited until the drinks arrived before setting the scene. She spoke just long enough to let them believe they were right. She told them how she had been thinking a lot about her future, how she had finally made a decision, and how she was ready to move forward. Then, right on cue, I walked in. The moment Richard saw me, his expression froze mid-smirk. Linda's face went slack, like her brain couldn't process what she was looking at. Sarah, completely unfazed, waved me over like nothing was wrong. I took my seat beside her, grinning as I set a thick folder down on the table. Before they could even speak, Sarah reached into the folder and slapped down printed bank statements right in front of them. Pages and pages of transaction history, all showing the $250,000 neatly tucked away in my account. She leaned back in her chair and asked, almost too casually, if they wanted to see what their money had bought. Silence. Richard and Linda stared at the papers, their eyes scanning the numbers like they were hoping it was a mistake. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Linda opened her mouth, then shut it, blinking rapidly. Sarah didn't stop there. She spelled it out for them. She told them she had known about the bribe the entire time. She explained that all they had done was push her even closer to me. Every single thing they had done, the money, the meddling, the fake suitor, had only proven that she didn't need them. That's when Linda snapped. Her voice rose instantly, attracting attention from nearby tables. She accused me of conning her daughter, of brainwashing Sarah into some elaborate scheme. Her voice hit a shrill, panicked pitch as she demanded that Sarah wake up and see that I had only been using her. Sarah let her finish before calmly pulling out one last document, a signed statement from her bank, confirming that weeks ago she had already moved every single cent of her personal savings out of family-controlled accounts. Richard's face turned red. He leaned forward, pointing a finger at me like he was seconds away from demanding a refund. He called it stolen money and claimed claimed I had tricked them. I just laughed, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. I reminded him that he handed me that money voluntarily. No conditions, no contracts, just a bribe, and I simply accepted it. Richard's next move was predictable. He pulled out the oldest, most overused control tactic in the book. He threatened to cut Sarah off financially, said that if she stayed with me, she was dead to them. Sarah barely even blinked. She repeated what was already obvious. She didn't need their money. That's when things really fell apart. Sarah pulled out her phone and made a single vague but pointed post online. No names, no details, just a carefully worded statement about how disappointing it is when parents try to buy their child's happiness. The family chat exploded. Calls, messages, distant relatives suddenly interested in what was going on. Gossip spread fast. Within hours, the extended family was divided. Some were horrified, others tried to defend Richard and Linda, but the damage was done. And then came the business fallout. Richard, who prided himself on his reputation, started getting questions from his business associates. The whispers had started. Nobody in his world wanted to be associated with the man who tried to bribe his future son-in-law. Desperate, Richard threw one last bluff. He threatened legal action, demanded I return the money, and even hinted at getting his lawyers involved. I just stared at him. Then I reminded him that a bribe isn't legally binding. There was no contract, no agreement, nothing he could do. The realization hit him hard. He gritted his teeth, his hands clenching the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Linda, still fuming, demanded to know if this was really what Sarah wanted, to betray her own family. Sarah just stood up, grabbed my hand, and walked out of that restaurant without looking back. Richard and Linda sat frozen, powerless, and the best part, they had just paid for our wedding. Word spread fast. Within hours of our dramatic exit from the restaurant, Richard and Linda went into full damage control mode. The moment it became clear they couldn't intimidate Sarah into crawling back, they switched tactics, rewriting history. By the next morning, family members started reaching out. Some were confused, others were furious. Linda had already spun a new version of events, claiming I had blackmailed them into giving me the money. According to her, I had threatened to ruin Sarah's future unless they paid me to leave. The way she told it, I wasn't just a gold digger, I was a full-blown con artist. The family split into two camps. Some saw right through it. These were the relatives who had always known Richard and Linda were manipulative. They weren't surprised to hear about the bribe, and a few even told Sarah they were glad she finally stood up to them. The rest, especially the ones who depended on Richard financially, took their side immediately. They parroted the same talking points, that we had tricked Richard and Linda, that Sarah was being controlled, and that I was a nobody who had schemed his way into their money. Sarah shut it all down with one text. She dropped the bank statement, the one showing that she had already moved all her money out before we even exposed them. The chat went silent after that. Richard's response came later that evening. He sent a message saying Sarah was dead to them, unless she left me. Sarah didn't even hesitate. She took a screenshot and sent it right back. A few minutes later, her younger brother and sister left the family chat. They had always resented their parents, always forced into the same mold, always treated like assets instead of children. They had stayed quiet for years, playing along because it was easier. But this was their breaking point. Richard lost 3 kids in one night. That's when he tried to take back control. The next day, he contacted Sarah's bank and attempted to freeze her assets. He must have thought she was careless, that she had left something vulnerable for him to sink his claws into. But she had already moved everything. He called his lawyer. That didn't go well either. The lawyer told him straight up, the money was a gift. There was no contract, no conditions, no legal ground to stand on. He couldn't touch a cent of it. A week passed before Linda finally cracked. Late at night, she called Sarah. The same woman who had smirked while bribing me was now sobbing into the phone, saying they just wanted the best for her. She begged Sarah to come home, told her she was breaking the family apart. Sarah let her talk. Then she asked a single question, would you have been okay with someone bribing me to leave Richard? Silence. Linda hung up. Meanwhile, Richard's business started crumbling. His associates heard about the bribe. Some laughed. Others whispered about what it said about his judgment. Some started distancing themselves. Deals that once seemed solid suddenly slowed down. Business partners who had always respected his power and control were now seeing him for what he was. It all built up to one glorious moment of public humiliation. At a charity gala, a high society event where Richard and Linda used to shine, people whispered as they walked past. Some avoided eye contact altogether. And then, one of Linda's closest friends, someone she had always tried to impress, asked loud enough for others to hear, so how's the son-in-law buyout going? Linda left early. A week later, Sarah and I booked a honeymoon. Not just any honeymoon, a 2-week luxury vacation at one of Richard and Linda's favorite resorts. We used their money. Sarah made sure to post pictures, sunsets, private pools, the finest dinners. Linda left the family chat the next morning. There was one last attempt, a text. No long speech, no fake apologies, just a simple, please come home. Sarah replied immediately. I already have. That was it. She was done. By the end of the month, we had signed a lease on our dream home, fully independent, completely free. And for the first time in years, Richard and Linda had no control. Richard wasn't the kind of man to lose quietly. After Sarah cut them off and we moved forward with our lives, he did the only thing someone like him could do. He tried to rewrite the story. It started with whispers, mutual acquaintances, distant family members. Even a few of Sarah's old family friends suddenly started reaching out with concern. According to them, Richard was telling everyone that Sarah had been manipulated. The version he spun: I was a gold digger who had isolated Sarah from her family. He claimed that I had forced her to cut ties, that I had poisoned her mind against them, that the money, blackmail. He painted himself as the concerned father who had simply made a mistake trying to protect his daughter, only for me to take advantage of the situation. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. He even tried taking it to the media. A business magazine that had previously done a feature on him suddenly reached out to Sarah. Apparently, Richard had given them a twisted version of events, trying to frame himself as the victim. The problem? Journalists fact-check. Sarah simply handed over the bank statements, the screenshots, and the very public post she had made about the bribe. The story never saw the light of day. Meanwhile, Linda's perfect social life started cracking. She had spent years cultivating an impeccable image, the well-connected high society woman who was always gracious and poised. But now, the people she used to impress weren't buying it. Every time she showed up at an event, whispers followed. The same people who had once fawned over her family's wealth were now side-eyeing her. Because let's be real, no one respects someone who tries to bribe their own daughter's fiancé. She started withdrawing, skipped gatherings, stopped hosting. The woman who once lived for high society functions was suddenly disappearing from them. That's when Richard made his last desperate move. He sent Sarah an offer, a formal one, with legal jargon and everything. If she left me, she would be reinstated in his will. Full access to family funds, unlimited financial security. Sarah didn't even blink. She forwarded the email to her siblings. Her brother was the one who leaked it into the family group chat. The reaction was instant. The relatives who had still defended Richard, silent. The ones who had already taken Sarah's side, laughing. The sheer desperation in the email was too much to ignore. Richard had spent months claiming he was done with Sarah, that he had moved on and cut her off. But now, he was begging her to take his money if it meant she would leave me. His credibility, gone. And then karma hit. While Richard was busy telling everyone I was a loser, I got promoted. A major one. I had already been doing well, but this was the kind of promotion that tripled my salary and put me in a position that even Richard's so-called better options for Sarah would envy. Sarah made sure people knew. Her engagement post? Flawless. The caption was simple: best decision I ever made. The comments? Filled with support, even from Richard's former business contacts. Richard and Linda were officially uninvited from the wedding. Sarah's siblings took their place. They had been waiting for this moment for years, the chance to stand up to their parents and prove that they weren't in control anymore. But Richard, he wasn't done. He warned a family member that he wouldn't be stopped from attending. Sarah hired security, and just like clockwork, on the wedding day, Richard and Linda showed up. They arrived at the venue dressed like they belonged there, ready to make some dramatic last-minute speech about how Sarah was making the biggest mistake of her life. The problem? Security was already expecting them. The second they tried to enter, they were stopped at the door. Richard demanded to be let in, but security stood their ground. Guests started noticing. Some whispered. Others laughed. Richard and Linda were forced to leave, humiliated. And that's how the wedding started, with their final defeat. As we stood at the altar, Richard's last words echoed in the back of my mind. If you go through with this, you're out of the family forever. Sarah didn't hesitate. She walked down the aisle. She chose happiness, chose freedom, chose me. The wedding? Perfect. Filled with people who actually loved and supported us. And the best part? Sarah and I exchanged wedding gifts that night. Matching Rolexes, engraved on the back, paid for by Richard. The next morning, Richard and Linda were blocked. Forever. A full year passed since Sarah and I walked out of our wedding, leaving Richard and Linda blocked, permanently erased from our lives. It turned out to be the best decision we ever made. Life without them? Peaceful. Better than we could have imagined. We built something for ourselves. No more drama. No more control. No more rich parents trying to play puppet master. Meanwhile, Richard's empire started to crumble. The whispers from before? They turned into reality. A former business contact of his, a guy who used to respect Richard, casually mentioned to Sarah's brother that Richard's company was struggling. Deals were falling apart. People who once trusted his judgment started backing away. The reason? No one wanted to work with a man who lost control of his own family. The bribe story followed him. It had spread quietly through business circles. People didn't take him seriously anymore. Investors didn't trust him. Clients preferred competitors. The once untouchable Richard had tarnished his own name. And Linda? She had it even worse. Without Richard's status propping her up, she became socially irrelevant. The high society events she used to thrive in, she wasn't invited anymore. Once she was the woman who everyone wanted to impress. Now, they barely acknowledged her. She turned to Facebook rants, posts about disloyal children, about how family should always come first. Her old friends ignored them. Some laughed, others unfollowed. She spent months trying to play the victim, but no one cared. and then the final sibling fell away. Sarah's younger brother had always stayed in contact with them, from a distance. He had kept things polite but never fully cut them off. But after watching how much happier Sarah was without them, he made his decision. One day, he just stopped answering. No more calls, no more visits, no more dealing with their toxic control. Richard and Linda, completely alone. Their biggest fear had come true. And then it got worse. A former family friend, someone who had once been close to them, pulled Sarah aside at an event. They had a small piece of news. Richard, he was a joke now. Whenever his name came up in business conversations, people rolled their eyes. Nobody took him seriously. His legacy? Destroyed. And then came the final, desperate attempt, an email. It was from Linda, a pathetic attempt at reconciliation. Please, let's fix this. Sarah didn't even open it, marked as spam. Meanwhile, Sarah's career? Thriving. Without her parents' constant interference, she focused on what mattered. Within the year, she was promoted, became a partner at her law firm. She did what Richard never thought possible, succeeded without him. And me? The manipulative gold digger Richard had tried to buy off? I made more money than ever before, and we still wore our matching Rolexes. The ones engraved with paid for by Richard. We never took them off. A constant reminder of how they tried to get rid of me, and ended up funding our success. We started a new tradition. Every year we hosted a family gathering, not with Richard and Linda, obviously, but with the people who actually mattered. Sarah's siblings, our close friends, the real family we built, the kind not controlled by money or manipulation. And then, we paid off our house. The dream home Richard once claimed I'd never afford. We owned it outright. No strings, no debt. Ours. A few months later, Sarah got one last piece of news. Richard had lost a major business deal, one that could have saved his company. The reason? His reputation. No one wanted to work with him anymore. The once mighty Richard had finally collapsed under his own arrogance. And then, the final cherry on top, Linda's public meltdown. A distant relative attended a formal dinner party, the kind Linda used to rule over. Someone made a casual comment about Sarah's success. Linda lost it. She screamed about how Sarah was ungrateful, about how she had betrayed the family. It was loud, embarrassing. People stared. Some whispered. Linda? She stormed out. The last of her social standing, gone. And Sarah? She had zero regrets. Our life was 100 times better without them. And on our anniversary, as we sat in our dream home, Sarah raised a glass, smirked, and said the words we both knew were true. Best bribe ever. The silence didn't last long. Late one night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it immediately. Linda. The message started slurred and incoherent, the sound of a glass clinking in the background. Then through sniffles, she started sobbing. She never meant to hurt Sarah. She missed her. Family should always come first. It went on for 2 full minutes, a rambling mix of self-pity and excuses, blaming outsiders for tearing the family apart. Not once did she take responsibility. Not once did she acknowledge the bribe, the manipulation, or the years of control. I deleted it. No response. A week later, Richard made his move. A short, sterile email landed in my inbox. Let's put this behind us. It's time to talk. No apology, no explanation. Just a cold attempt to rewrite history. I didn't even bother showing it to Sarah. Ignored. Meanwhile, Richard's empire was collapsing. A business associate, someone I had met through my own work, casually mentioned over lunch that Richard's company was on shaky ground. The bribe scandal had left a stain that wouldn't wash off. Investors were hesitant. Clients had moved on. Sarah's brother confirmed it. Richard had been forced to sell off assets to keep things afloat. The control he once had, gone. That's when Linda turned to manipulation. She started messaging Sarah's siblings, not outright begging, but dropping hints about how life is too short for grudges, about how parents aren't perfect. It backfired. Sarah's brother, who had already gone no contact, had enough. He blocked her. Linda's next move? The fake reunion. Richard and Linda organized a family dinner. They extended the invite to everyone, except Sarah. The goal was obvious. Guilt trip her siblings into convincing her to come. It didn't work. Sarah's siblings saw through it and didn't even acknowledge it. That's when Linda cracked. She took to Facebook. A long, rambling post about ungrateful children. How some people forget everything their parents did for them. How money-hungry outsiders destroy families. The comments were brutal. Some ignored it. Others mocked it. A few distant relatives, tired of her drama, called her out. Then Sarah's brother responded publicly. We're not ungrateful. We just finally got sick of your games. The post was deleted within an hour. Richard, now desperate, made a final demand. He called me. The second I picked up, he went straight to business. I'd had my fun. It was time to be a man about it and return the money. I hung up mid-sentence. Minutes later I got an email, a formal legal notice, demanding repayment of the $250,000. A lawyer friend took one glance at it and laughed. Unenforceable nonsense. Richard's final move. A pathetic bluff. That's when Sarah sent her final message. Short, simple, unmistakable. We are never coming back. This is your fault. Then, we blocked them. Everywhere. No more emails. No more calls. No more flying monkeys. The final cutoff. And to celebrate, Sarah and I threw a small gathering. Just her siblings, our real family, and the people who actually cared. A celebration of freedom. And for the first time ever, Richard and Linda had zero power over us. Richard's business empire is gone. It didn't happen all at once. It started with small cracks, deals falling through, business partners pulling out, longtime investors going quiet. Then, the big one hit. A major contract, one that could have saved what was left of his company, got pulled at the last second. The reason? His reputation. No one wanted to work with a man who tried to bribe his own daughter's fiancé. It had become industry gossip. People Googled his name, and the first thing that popped up, the scandal, the bribe. The fact that he lost control of his own family and tried to buy his way out of it. Investors saw him as reckless, unstable, untrustworthy. The company tanked. Liquidation, asset sales. He was forced to sell everything to cover debts. The office building, gone. The high-rise penthouse they once boasted about, foreclosed. Richard, once the powerful businessman, was left with nothing, and Linda, with no more money, status, or influence. She was completely abandoned by her so-called high society friends. She tried keeping up appearances, attending events, acting like nothing had changed. But the whispers followed her. The same people who once fawned over her lifestyle now saw her as a joke. She became invisible. No invites, no phone calls, just a washed-up socialite clinging to a life that didn't exist anymore. Then, one last email came in. Linda's name popped up in my inbox. A final plea. She begged for a second chance to talk, to fix things. I didn't even open it. Straight to spam. Meanwhile, Sarah's success skyrocketed. Without her parents' control, expectations, or interference, she built something on her own. She launched her own law firm. What Richard once mocked as ambition beyond her capabilities became a thriving business. She pulled in clients, built connections, and within a year, her firm was more successful than Richard's company had ever been. And Richard, he never apologized. A mutual acquaintance mentioned in passing that he still blamed us for his downfall. According to him, we had destroyed his legacy. Zero accountability. No shock there. And then Linda had her final meltdown. A distant cousin ran into her at a charity event. The conversation started civil, but the moment Sarah's name was mentioned, Linda snapped. Full rant, loud, public. How Sarah betrayed the family, how she was brainwashed by me, how she had thrown away everything for a nobody. People stared, some whispered, others laughed. Linda stormed out. And then, the ultimate poetic karma. Their old house, the one Richard and Linda once treated as a symbol of their power, it got repossessed. Sarah's brother bought it, just to spite them. He gutted it, redesigned it, turned it into something they wouldn't even recognize. Richard tried starting fresh. He pitched a new business venture, tried getting back in the game. The problem? His reputation followed him. People looked him up, saw the bribe story, and no one wanted to touch him. No trust, no credibility. Every time he tried to rebuild, he hit a wall. Meanwhile, Sarah and I, we bought our dream vacation home, paid for on our own terms. No handouts, no strings, just ours. Linda, desperate for relevance, started pushing a new narrative. She told whoever would listen that Sarah had been manipulated, that I was the reason their family fell apart. The problem? No one believed her. People knew the truth. And Sarah, she wasn't just thriving, she was winning. One day, she upgraded her wedding ring. A subtle yet petty move. Her only comment. Well, Richard did contribute to our happiness in the end. And then, in one last pathetic attempt, Linda tried to show up uninvited to a family wedding. Security kicked her out within minutes. The relatives who once took Richard's side, some had started reaching out, apologizing, realizing the truth. Sarah never let them back in. She had nothing to prove anymore. And when we heard updates about Richard and Linda, we felt nothing. No anger, no regret, just peace. And on our wedding anniversary, as we sipped champagne in our dream home, Sarah smirked and said the words we both knew were true. Best bribe ever. 2 years had passed since Sarah and I cut off Richard and Linda for good. Life had been peaceful. No drama, no guilt tripping, no more attempts to manipulate their way back into Sarah's life. Then, out of nowhere, an anonymous email landed in Sarah's inbox. It wasn't spam. It wasn't from Richard or Linda. It was from one of Richard's former business partners. The subject line: "You might want to see this." Attached was a news article. Richard had been caught committing financial fraud. He was under criminal investigation. The article laid everything out. Years of shady deals, mismanaged funds, falsified records. Turns out when his company started tanking, Richard didn't just accept defeat, he tried to cover his losses by cooking the books. Investors caught wind of it, and now, he was being investigated for fraud and embezzlement, millions in unpaid debts. a lawsuit from his former associates. And the best part, it was public. His downfall was officially making headlines. Linda, of course, lost it. She took to social media immediately. A full-blown meltdown. She posted rants about how Richard was set up, how the system was unfair, and the best part, how Sarah should help her father. Help him. The same man who tried to buy Sarah's fiancé out of her life, who cut her off and disowned her when she refused to bend to his control. The comments were brutal. No one supported her. Some people laughed. Others just responded with the same screenshots of the bribe scandal that had ruined Richard's career. Meanwhile, Richard's legal troubles got worse. The more people dug into his finances, the more corruption they found. The lawsuits piled up. His former business partners turned on him. He was now facing actual prison time. And Linda? She tried one last desperate sympathy play. She contacted Sarah's brother, not Sarah, her brother, begging. Richard was in serious legal trouble. They were losing everything. If they could just get some financial help, just a little, they could fix things. Sarah's brother laughed and blocked her. No one was coming to save them. Sarah and I decided it was time for one last move. Using a portion of the bribe money Richard had given me, we donated to a charity he despised. The one he had mocked in business meetings. The one he said was a waste of resources. We made sure our names were on the donor list. And then, the final nail in Richard's coffin. He was formally charged. His career was over. And just like that, he filed for bankruptcy. Everything gone. Linda was forced to sell their remaining assets. The house? Gone. The cars? Sold. The luxury lifestyle? Completely wiped out. And just like that, she went from high society wife to irrelevant. No friends, no connections, just the wreckage of a life they destroyed themselves. The last time we ever heard from them, Linda sent one last guilt-tripping message. A pathetic attempt at one more manipulation. Sarah glanced at it, then just laughed. We won. And that was it. The ultimate poetic justice. Richard lost everything, not because of us, but because he couldn't accept that he didn't control Sarah. And while he sat in legal limbo, we decided to close this chapter in the most satisfying way possible. We booked a luxury vacation at the same resort where Richard originally bribed me. This time, we paid for it with our own money, not his. And while we were there, sitting poolside, Sarah and I made an announcement. We were expecting a baby. The next generation, one that would never know manipulation, control, or toxic power plays. Sarah made a promise that day. Our child would never experience what she went through. We were breaking the cycle. And then, the final blow. Richard was sentenced. Prison. For all his power, for all his arrogance, he ended up exactly where he deserved to be. And Sarah and I, we didn't even react. We had moved on. Our life was truly complete without him.